the perinatal period is one where throughout all of human history, people have understood you just need support. It's not a pathological thing at all. It's a natural thing that during this time, you need support. Just like children need support emotionally, physically. When you're sick, you need support. But also there are phases in your life when you need support.
Yes.
When you have a baby, you should have people around you and you should have support on every level, physical, practical, mentally, emotional. There should be people around you. And that should be a given, that this is not because you're failing. This is because you're going through a deep transformation that will destabilize everything you know about yourself.
Welcome to the Motherhood Clinic, a podcast about caring for mothers after childbirth, led by clinical experience and real-life stories. If you're a new mom and ever asked yourself, is what I'm going through normal? Should I be worried? Or who should I ask for help? This podcast is for you. It's for anyone navigating those early weeks, months, or even years after having a baby. Each episode brings together voices from across the motherhood journey, from clinicians, experts, and mothers from all walks of life. We're here to help you feel more empowered in your unique motherhood journey. We believe in a better start to motherhood.
Welcome, Vanessa, to the Motherhood Clinic podcast. You have a beautiful background where you are in beautiful Philippines. So I'll let you talk a bit about that in a moment. But while we're talking today, you are the founder of Mothering Minds, which is providing therapy to parents. And we'd love to talk a bit more about that. Obviously, our audience being new and expectant mothers will be aware of the value of mental health. And we'll talk a bit more about that. But today's conversation, we're going to have two. So this conversation today will be about, is this normal? Right. And I think that's the question that every parent asks themselves when they go through something as big as childbirth, and even after childbirth, and even before that, right? So we really want to, it's such a big and vacuous question. I think it's intentionally vague, but we're going to use part of your story and what you're doing to really dig into that and provide hopefully some value to people. And then the second one is, when we've answered, is this normal? And how do you identify when you need help, is how to get help. And obviously, you're going to be more familiar with some of the barriers that exist to getting help. And what can we do to overcome some of those? And then talk a bit about what Mothering Minds does to provide that support. So that's the lay of the land for today. Vanessa, I'd love to give you the opportunity to give yourself an introduction and talk about the beautiful surroundings that you're in at the moment. And then we'll jump into the conversation. So Vanessa, you.
Thank you so much for having me, Patrick, and I'm really looking forward to the chat today. So I'm Vanessa. I'm the founder of Mothering Minds. It's a perinatal mental health platform. We offer specialist one-to-one and couples therapy for the whole journey into parenthood. So that's preconception, pregnancy, and the postnatal period. We basically match people with specialist psychotherapists, so psychotherapists that specialize in parenthood and matrescence. We pride ourselves in providing this access very quickly, usually matching people within 2 days, sometimes even within the same day, making sure that everyone gets to see a therapist within a few days when they need it, and they can stay with us for as long as they want or end or take a break. It's very much on demand, so that people can be flexible, which obviously around this time period is really necessary. And I'm running this UK-based business from the Philippines, where my husband and we moved in September with our daughter from Cambridge to a tiny island in the Philippines, off-grid, to basically try a little bit more of a community-focused lifestyle that was also more in touch with nature. And another big aspect was it was just very difficult to run a startup, which obviously I wasn't paying myself for at all to start with, in the UK. And so living on one income with a child, both full time, really tired, feeling really stretched. We just really thought about if there is a way to sort of make this easier for us at this point in time. So the move abroad was something that we considered for a while, and then in the end we did it in September, and we're really happy we did, because it did make things a lot easier. We have a lot more support here. Life is calmer and the pace is less stressful. And it just allowed me to focus on mothering minds more than I think I could have done in the UK.
That's incredible, Vanessa. And I think there's a broader topic that you touch upon in your story as you were just reflecting, around certain transitions that people make in their lives. Certainly around, motherhood and the advent of having a child being one of those big triggers to be like, I'm not saying that everyone has to suddenly up and leave and live off grid, right? But they are certainly a key event in your lifetime to consider, potential changes, or, is this how I want to live my life? So I feel like that's a broader conversation I'd love to come back to at some point. But to our conversation around mental health and is this normal? Before we jump into your story, Vanessa, I'd love to ask a stupid question and almost set the scene around, like, why is mental health important? And what is some of the context that you're seeing at like the 10,000 foot view, just to kind of paint the picture for someone listening in? They want to be like, okay, give me the lay of the land to understand this. Why is it important? And then we'll go into your story a bit more. But just, why is mental health important, particularly for mothers?
Yeah, I mean, let's get some perspective.
Yeah.
The reality is that what we go through in life, fundamentally, the facts don't ever matter as much as how we feel about them. And so
Mm,
how we are emotionally really paints a picture of our life. It can be exactly the same life. And if we feel calm and accepting and supported in it, we will experience our life as a happy life. But if we feel stretched, pushed, unseen in the same life, we will be miserable. And so
mm,
just knowing that our emotional lens is really the one lens that that makes us feel happy with our lives or not,
yes.
just underscores how important it is to look after our mental health.
I think that's a great answer to a particularly vague question. And intentionally. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it is, it's the story we tell about ourselves that makes us feel a certain way. And if nothing else, the experience of something is our interpretation of that event. So I think that's a great answer. So Vanessa, I'd love to lead in to this conversation with your story, if we can, and then share a bit about what was your journey into motherhood? What were the expectations versus the reality? What was some of the hurdles and the joys? So tell us a bit about that, and then we'll use that to kind of explore this question of, is this normal, or what was normal in any of that event? So can you share a bit more about that journey for you?
Yeah. So when I had my daughter in 2022, before that, I'd sort of been thinking about the idea of parenthood, and I think I was trying to be aware of what was going to come our way if we were going to go and have a child. But so much of the focus was on sort of practically how is a child going to impact our life.
Mm,
In in that, I think there was a real sort of blind spot in how it might transform me or how it might transform my husband as well, uh,
mm,
emotionally and mentally. And I was aware of postnatal depression, for example, but that was the only condition I knew about. Postnatal depression. Yeah, you might have this crazy depression after you have a child because of your hormones, but I didn't know really that sort of matrescence, which we do have in parallel in fathers as well, matrescence, involves an entire reconfiguration of the brain, and that my hormones would change, that my brain would change, and that would make me experience life very differently to how I was used to.
mm,
And so going through that in pregnancy I had this sense that I could do with answers or support or just someone to guide me through this, but I didn't know how to put my finger on what it actually was that I wanted. And if
right.
I went to other people to sort of try and talk to them about it, it was almost uh, in a friendly way often dismissed as, oh,
Mm.
cold feet about having a child, and you're nervous, everyone's nervous, you'll be fine, you'll be a great mom. That, for example, annoyed me because I was thinking, how do you know? How do you know?
You don't know me. You don't know.
Yeah, and
Yeah, yeah.
people tell us, me and my husband, you're going to be great parents. it didn't have the reassuring effect that I think people well-intentionally, they were well-intentioned, but it didn't have the reassuring effect that I think they hoped it would have. Because I think what we were lacking was context, was education on, yeah, this is going to change your life so profoundly, and this is going to change your emotions profoundly, and you're going to come face to face with life and death in a very existential sense, even if everything goes well.
Yes.
Something around entering parenthood just has this incisive sort of, you're going to peer into the abyss a little bit, and I think I wasn't prepared for that. And then when I gave birth and I had my daughter, I felt like, I think I need some mental health support. And I was sort of able to narrow it down to that. Like, I think I need some mental health support. And I got in touch via the NHS route. And basically my symptoms weren't bad enough. I wasn't struggling enough.
Mm.
I wasn't really in a functional crisis, and my baby wasn't at risk. And so I was passed over. And then talking to other new parents, I realized that so many were struggling with the same questions and the same internal chaos and upheaval, but didn't have any kind of supportive framework around it. And those who struggled enough, they did, but they maybe just got a little bit further by basically being placed on a waiting list. And
Yes.
once they then got to see someone, they were provided with some generic CBT, and often didn't feel like that addressed anything for them at all. I mean,
Mm.
some it did say that it was useful, some in combination with medication, but I think a lot of the time people just felt they were being missed. Mums felt like they were being missed, and dads felt like they were being missed. And
Mm.
that actually was what sort of led me to setting up Mothering Minds, because I just felt like this isn't good enough, and I want to
Yep.
improve access, and I want to improve delivery via making something that will allow people to get in touch for a wide range of issues or concerns, and then meet a specialist therapist when they need one.
Great. That's a really thorough journey that you've painted there, Vanessa. And I think there's a lot of points I'd love to come back to, but the key one for me is this idea of, meeting the threshold, right? And I understand, like, we're not here. This is more to recognize what the system is designed to do and how it is right now versus what is needed by parents in certain situations. And your example is probably one that I think most parents can identify with, or even just people in general when it comes to the national healthcare system. And I think it's moving in the right way, where it's becoming more of a neighborhood one, because it is very difficult. It's almost impossible to like provide nationwide coverage because they have to put out the fires first. And I think what you're talking about is, for a lot of people, when you're in that gray zone, that feeling of like falling through the net, not meeting, you don't want to have to hit that red line before you get support. Uh, you're saying that I want to be proactive and I want to address things early on before it gets to that point, because I know something isn't feel quite right. So what can I do about it? And I think a lot of people would identify with this idea of, I don't want to have to, show the red flag, or sometimes just say the right words to trigger that. And like, I wanted to be proactive. And what is it I can do to get ahead of things, or just get that early support so that I'm not redlining in future? I think that's a really important point that I think, um, oftentimes in the health system we are, it's just it's a little what it is, but it is very reactive as opposed to proactive. And I think all these conversations, and I think there is encouraging signs. I think the health system is moving more to, how do we be proactive and empower people to take control of their own health. And so again, people like yourself that are doing the things, I think it's a really positive move, because it puts less strain on the system, which then eases everything. So I think that's an important one to come back to. So one question I had in your journey, we talk about expectations versus reality, and I think you're more exceptional, because actually before you had the baby, you were already thinking about this. And oftentimes, a lot of what parents go through is, certainly for us, is we didn't do any planning, and we kind of planned for the birth, but then everything afterwards, I was like, I'll figure that out later. But you were already ahead of that. So in terms of your expectations versus reality, what matched and what didn't match? I mean, were there some things that did match your expectations? Or was everything like, this is all new territory and I'm just having to navigate this from scratch? What was that like for you, Vanessa?
Yeah. I do think a lot of expectations were kind of blown out of the water in terms of what the reality was. I think one thing that I was very worried about was the sleep deprivation. And that's obviously what a lot of people talk about. And it has huge, it has a huge impact on your physical and your mental health. And I particularly am so precious about my sleep. And I I was thinking, I was trying to find out information around this and basically seeing like, oh, newborns sleep a lot. They really sleep a lot. And I would see these schedules, of like nap times and wake windows, and they feed every 3 hours. And in my head, actually, it didn't sound so bad because I thought, oh, you put them down and then you sleep for another 3 hours, and then you wake up and then you feed them, and you don't realize that they might stir for like 25 minutes before they wake up, and you're sort of on tenterhooks thinking, now they're up, and then they make little noises, and then once they are actually up, then you do feed them, and that might take 45 minutes, and then you settle them and burp them, and by they're sort of mostly asleep for most of it, so that's eating into the 3 hours. So for you, sort of more looks like 20 minutes and you're up again. And so actually how grueling the first few weeks were, that was really quite shocking. And I was so angry. So I got incredibly angry, which is something that, isn't spoken about as much, but that I experienced that really strongly. A few weeks in, I was just thinking, well, I am probably going to die because from this sort of amount of sleep deprivation, I don't know how you could carry on. And I was so angry at basically the setup that parents are being walking into this sort of blindly with the sense that, oh, well, everybody else has made it out, so you'll be fine. But if a lot of parents, I mean, if you have a good sleeper, then, brilliant. But a lot of parents don't, and especially in the first few months. And it feels a lot like torture. And it is very similar to, to torture, to not get your basic needs met. And then realizing that so many cultures have systems around this. More community-centered cultures have 4 to 6 weeks of neighbors, aunties, cousins, mothers, sisters around to care for the mother, to ensure that she gets the rest she needs and the recovery. And speaking to friends who had given birth via C-section, for example, I was appalled, at and really heartbroken as well at the stories of getting up with, a bleeding abdomen, this huge wound, to try and feed this baby on your own, because that's obviously normal, and nobody else needs more help than that, unless you're somehow particularly in a bad way. And if you're not, if you're a functional person, you should be able to do this on your own. And I think that really sort of how that toppled for me this sense, if you have a kid, you should be able to do it on your own. You've chosen to have a child, you should care for them. That just completely crashed and burned within a few weeks. That was gone. And and I think that was maybe the biggest reality check that I experienced at the time.
Thank you for sharing that, Vanessa. I think you paint a really clear picture that I think a lot of parents will absolutely identify with. And maybe and this isn't to scare new parents, this is more just to paint a potential reality. And I'm just saying, you don't know what that reality will be one, but part of these conversations is just raising to awareness, like, this is just how things are. And, the conversation around anger is an interesting one, as you mentioned, because it's come up in other topics. But as you said, the most commonly recognized symptom is postpartum depression, which, there are broader conversations we want to talk around that as well, because that is, obviously critical to understand. And, how do you prepare for it? But there'll be a whole range of emotions that parents go through, and mothers in particular. And I wanted to maybe broaden this conversation out then. So, a lot of what you're doing at Mother in Mind is connecting parents with the therapy that they need to get the support that they need. And I think you're in a position to kind of understand at a kind of a bird's eye level, when do people tend to get in touch, and what do they get in touch around? So you've talked from your own particular personal story around what triggered you to think, you know what, this doesn't feel quite normal and I want to get help. So what does that look like? What have been your observations and insights from the range of parents that come to Mothering Minds? So to that say, you know, when and what do they talk about to get in touch with you?
Yeah. So, in terms of what they experience, anxiety is actually the leader for us. So that's 60% of all our inquiries. Everyone that comes through our system, 60% will state that anxiety, intense anxiety, has been part of their life, sort of around whatever perinatal period they're in. And then the next one, we do have low mood is about a third, but that's half of the people that actually, and anxiety usually co-occurs with some other symptoms. For example, birth trauma is also a very common one. So birth trauma with lingering effects in both parents. So often the mums get in touch, but it usually doesn't take very long, maybe a couple of sessions in, that they disclose that actually my partner is really struggling from witnessing that birth as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we have rage. That's 1 in 3 will mention that as well. And so these are really the four big ones: is anxiety, low mood, birth trauma, and anger.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
then in terms of when they get in touch, it's usually fairly late. So we often get messages that just words like drowning, failing, really can't cope, don't see how I can survive this. So very close to a point where actually we can't support anymore because you're in such a deep crisis that you need to be seen by someone immediately who might even be able to care for you and keep you safe. But yeah, sort of not too far away from that. A lot of people get in touch when they are really at breaking point. And that's a real shame, because I think it signals that, again, we think that mental health support is only when you're exhibiting something pathological, something really, really wrong. And then you get in touch and get support. When actually the perinatal period is one where throughout all of human history, people have understood you just need support. It's not a pathological thing at all. It's a natural thing that during this time, you need support. Just like children need support emotionally, physically. When you're sick, you need support. But also there are phases in your life when you need support. A young couple setting up, for example. It's normal. They would, you want your friends around when you move.
Yes.
When you have a baby, you should have people around you, and you should have support on every level: physical, practical, mentally, emotional. There should be people around you. And
Yeah.
that should be a given, that this is not because you're failing. This is because you're going through a deep transformation that will destabilize everything you know about yourself,
Yeah.
your relationship, and your body as well.
Yeah. Yeah. You got some really interesting points that I'd like to kind of pick out there, Vanessa. And I think a big one, as you're talking, you use the word support as opposed to therapy. And I think that's probably therein part of the challenge. Um, you know, oftentimes people associate therapy, there are certain connotations with that word. Is in response to, crisis or a trauma or something. So, whereas when you use the word support, it's like, actually, that's just maintenance. That's just keeping things humming, right? And I think that's a really important distinction as you talk, saying, actually, this is just good maintenance. And that's what you'd want. We don't want to have to get to a point. And I know these are just simple linguistics, but I think it's important because I think for people listening in, it is about how you view mental health, right? And how you view therapy. It's just support. And there is, I think, still an ongoing change in like societal views of what therapy is and what it's for and when to go do it. And I personally can also identify with that as well, where you see therapy as something that, oh, that's just if there's a problem, right? I have therapy if there's a problem. But what we're advocating and what the way you talk about it is actually, this is not in response to a problem. This is just about keeping good maintenance so that you don't experience a problem later on. So Is there any guidance that you give to someone listening in that of how to rethink that relationship when they hear the word therapy versus actually this is more about support? How would you, particularly for those that have not been through this yet, that's the hardest thing, because I think many mothers and parents that have experienced that pain and that have gone through it and then say, okay, you know what, first time around was terrible, second time around I'm going to do this again. But it's those first time, like us, like imagine us the first time around where you didn't know what you didn't know. Is there anything that can reach those people that you think is useful, or do you have to experience this to realize that actually I should have done this the first time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's basically because of the disconnect we have in society around our minds and bodies. When someone gets pregnant, they wouldn't by default think that they're just going to give birth by themselves. They wouldn't really think, I'm going to be pregnant and I'm never going to see a doctor and I'm never going to see a midwife and I'm going to give birth by myself in the woods. Some people think that, but most people accept automatically as soon as this stage has been reached of, wow, I'm now carrying a baby. I need to go and find someone who can support me with this, who can check that I'm okay and that the baby's okay. And this doesn't need to just happen physically. It should happen emotionally as well. And it should be just a matter of course that you and your partner screen yourselves, know what to look out for, know what signs to look out for, that these things are coming, that certain trimesters are associated with certain mood changes, that the nesting period in the final trimester can bring up a lot of relationship strain because one of you might be ready to sort of get everything ready for the baby, the other one might be fighting some kind of denial or fear of birth. So to understand that there are these things that are coming up and that are pretty normal and to be expected, but that just because they're expected, it doesn't mean that you should do them on your own. Because as humans, we're fundamentally a social species. We've always worked as a community. And having lost that, obviously, in a very individualist, modernized West, it has brought some advantages, but it has also left us with huge blind spots in this kind of care.
Mm. Yeah, the key part you mentioned there for me was just because it's expected doesn't mean you should have it alone. Um, and I think again, coming back to that broader question of is this normal? A lot of what I take from when you speak, Vanessa, is this idea of to answer is this normal is incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to do alone. Because how would you know what's normal if you've never experienced it? And part of whether it's developing a community, having friends and family around you, or seeking support like mental health support, let's call it mental health support, right? Is to give you those guardrails or reference points to say, look, you would have seen thousands of women that have been through this. That can give you a reference point of what is normal. That will probably be supported if you're lucky. You know, there'll be cultural differences, there'll be ethnicity differences, there's going to be age and gender differences, right? Around how people do that, and personality differences, obviously. So part of it is you trying to almost like triangulate those, but that's impossible to do alone. So what we're advocating in this conversation is building that support system around you, of which mental health is one of those elements, not everything, right? As you said, there's practical help. There's going to be, as saying, if you're lucky to have the aunties and uncles to come by and cook for you, etc. But that we appreciate won't be for many people. But there are also things you can do to prepare for that. You know, we talked previously with doulas and people that might want to batch cook or people that do confinement practice. You know, these are all principles, I guess, of you getting the support that you need around you, like this ecosystem of support that, you know, no mother should experience motherhood alone, right? So I know we're both saying the same thing, but part of it, I think, is you can't overestimate or kind of say that too many times, right? Where you want to have that support around you. I think motherhood, parenthood in general, is one of those big contradictions where, as you said, everyone goes through it, but we also go through it alone. And so it can be particularly isolating for a lot of people, uniquely isolating, where you're just like, what the hell? Like, I don't even know myself anymore. So having some sort of system around you of support, I think is, critical, but something that often we appreciate a bit too late. So hopefully there's a bit of a reflection on kind of our journeys. Again, coming back to this overall question of kind of, is this normal? And there's an interesting question, like to put you like, there's normal versus worthy of support. And I think oftentimes the misconception we make is things have to not be normal to seek support. And I think a big thing that you're talking about is to maintain normal, or to how that is, to how do we maintain that healthy maintenance with our mental health and other areas of our life. So kind of zooming out from this conversation and kind of trying to wrapping it up, what would you say is some of the key messages for people listening into this conversation, Vanessa? We've talked a bit about your journey, what you're seeing through other people, and how we want to reframe people's thinking around mental health. What would be some of the key things you'd want as coming in, either new parents or parents that are going through the second, third time? What would you want to say to them?
I think that if you experience a sense of failure or being particularly bad at being a parent, at being pregnant, at having given birth, at breastfeeding, at being in a relationship around a newborn, you're not failing and you're not bad at it. It's expected that the transformation is incredibly challenging and chaotic at times, and especially if there's a lack of support, which for most people in the UK that's the case, living away from family and just not having the kind of community we used to have. We're doing something that sort of humans have never done before. We're parenting in a way that humans have never parented before, and it's normal that it actually feels impossible, and that is not an internal failing. It's reflective of a systemic one. And so to understand that if you're struggling, to that you deserve help would be a really, really great message, I think, if people could take that away.
Excellent, Vanessa. I think that's a great way to round up this conversation. And I think to provide some positive hope for the next conversation, we'll talk about how to get help. So hopefully from this conversation, we've addressed some of that, that very big question of, is this normal? We've talked about what people go through, your particular story around what you went through, and as what that then transformed it into with Mother in Mind. So one, thank you for sharing your story so openly, Vanessa. I think it's been really helpful. In the next conversation, we'll talk about how to get help. So thank you for this discussion, Vanessa.
Great. Lovely. Thank you so much, Patrick.
Bye.
Bye.